All right, here, let's take Think for Yourself 4,000.
This is the typical result of liberals' efforts to help race relations.
What is black people and other minorities to get screwed over? So now liberals have successfully virtue signaled their way into Major League Baseball to get them to move the game out of Atlanta, Georgia for the 2021 All-Star Game. Of course, when they do this, when they do anything in terms of helping the black community from these big bad racists, they end up hurting the same people that they claim to be helping. In this case, upwards of $100 million in lost revenue for black-owned businesses in Atlanta, Georgia, and the surrounding area of Savannah, Georgia, where Atlanta has over 30% of their businesses there are black-owned. In Savannah, Georgia, it's around 23%. $100 million of lost revenue in a time when we need to have economic growth, in a time when the left continuously talks about how black people are not being represented when it comes to the economy and to opportunities. And now this thing happens, and all of a sudden, guess what? They're taking that said money away from the people that they claim to be wanting to help. Do they care? I don't know. I don't think so. It's so bad that even Stacey Abrams sees this. And we're going to talk about this in this article. We're also going to talk about a little bit more in terms of what's this big deal about voter integrity in terms of voter ID. The law that was passed in Georgia ensures that people have a valid voter ID when it comes to mail-in voting. We'll get into that here in a second. So it says here, I come down here, I mentioned to you about Savannah, 23% businesses are black, and Atlanta, 30% black, and so forth. It says here that the Major League Baseball intended to play the game at Atlanta Braves Stadium, but moved the location due to the new voter laws, which are aimed to curb voter fraud. Now, Stacey Abrams here mentions this in a quote here a little bit later. He talks about how boycotts in the past have been used for social change. But then she says, look, don't boycott us here though, because it's going to cost money and it's going to take resources out of the hands of the people like Latinos and Hispanics and blacks. And that's not going to be a good thing. And I agree with you. What I don't agree with is that you conflating the fact that you have boycotts in the past are the same as today. Boycotts in the past had to do with stuff that was outright unethical, downright criminal. Talking about stuff like poll taxes, which the Democrat Party was all about, discrimination, which the Democrat Party was all about in terms of segregation. So it's funny how Stacey Abrams talks about how boycotting was used, in the past for something like social change, which was necessary, but then she conflates it to here today, which was something like voter integrity, which to me is absolutely something that needs to happen. So Joe Biden came out and said, look, move the game out of Georgia over the new voter law. Democratic Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff said Friday that he would not support the Major League Baseball's decision and suggested that corporations express their opposition to the new law by ending financial support to Georgia's Republican Party. It says here, I absolutely oppose and reject any notion of boycotting Georgia. Georgia welcomes businesses, investment jobs, opportunities, and events. In fact, economic growth is driving much of the political progress we have seen here. Voting rights activist and Democratic gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams also advised companies against boycotts due to significant impact they could have on minority communities. No joke. Of course, you are right there. But here's the thing. Black, Latino, and AAPI and Native American voters whose votes are the most suppressed under State Bill 202, not true by the way, more on that, are also the most likely to be hurt by potential boycotts of Georgia. That's probably true. To our friends across the country, please do not boycott us, Abrams pleaded. But here, Ms. Abrams is clearly talking out two sides of her mouth. On one side, she says that, yes, don't boycott us because you're going to hurt people like Latinos and blacks and so forth. But then she turns around and says, because these are the same people whose votes are suppressed the most under this new state bill. And here, that's the thing, right? That's the big rub there. That's the false narrative that they throw in there to get what they want done. It's the lie that they use to get policy passed. And so here's the thing about that. Even Black Americans don't think that voter IDs are racist. Nearly 70% of Blacks support voter ID. Nearly 70% of Blacks support voter ID. This article from WND. Democrats contending laws requiring votes to present voter ID amount to discriminatory suppression of the Black vote are pushing legislation in the Senate that would gut state voter ID laws. This new Rasmussen National Poll online survey says that 69% of likely Black voters and 75% overall believe that voters should be required to show voter ID identification, such as driver's license, before being allowed to vote. Only 21% are opposed to such a requirement. It also says that 36 states have enacted some form of voter ID law. However, these laws could be nullified if the Senate approves H.R. 1, which passed the House on a party line vote. In the latest survey, 89% of Republicans support voter ID requirements, along with 60% Democrats and 77% of voters not affiliated with either major party. So overwhelmingly, Americans want voter ID laws. Why? It isn't so much about restricting people to vote, it's about protecting those who do vote. If I'm voting and I work hard, I pay taxes, I do the right thing, I go get registered to vote, I stand in line for an hour, I vote, and then have someone else who isn't supposed to vote, or have some factory printing off ballots and mailing them in, guess what? My vote no longer counts that much anymore. My vote doesn't count anymore, and it makes me less of a citizen. And that is what people don't want. They want fairness. People want fairness. They see past this racism crap. It is not racist to ask for a voter ID. Obviously, 70% of Black Americans, likely voters even, don't think so. They want that because they know voter integrity, voter ID protects their own vote, so it's not watered down with illegal votes. See why people can't get that through their heads. Here in this article here talks about different examples here by Burgess Owens. He says, you know what's racist? Assuming because I'm Black that I just don't have the capability to get an ID. Disclaimer, we are capable of getting an ID and even using the internet. Says here, I used an ID to drive a car, to get a job, to board a plane, to pick up prescriptions, and virtually everything else in life. So tell me again, why is showing an ID voter suppression? You know what, Burgess, it's not. That's why. I'm sure you remember in 2016, Amy Horowitz conducted one of these man on the street video surveys asking white people in New York City what they thought about voter ID laws. Let's play some of this. I got this queued up here. Let's check this out.
Do you have an opinion on voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist and they're bad. I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like, we know what we need to carry around.
Do you know any Black person who doesn't carry ID?
No.
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Like Black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, like you're not allowed to vote.
Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
Do you know any Black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Like the lady said, Black people carry IDs. I don't know any Black person that doesn't have ID on them. It's just ridiculous. And it's ridiculous to even have that notion. All it's doing is putting forth a narrative that makes no sense whatsoever just so they can pass an initiative. That's all it is. And the media runs with it because people are uninformed and refuse to stand by and stand up to the truth. And that is what I'm hoping is going to happen here, because all it's going to do is just make the situation much worse and keep people more and more oppressed. Because like Charles Barkley said this weekend, both sides, both parties, he said Republicans and Democrats, I think it's more Democrats, obviously, but we'll give him that both sides want to separate and divide by racial bounds, white, Black, by economic bounds, rich, poor, so that they can run off with the money and the power and the influence. And I can't agree any more than that, Charles Barkley. Great statement. It is true. And here's the thing. That's all this is about. False narratives to get false policies to keep money and power in the hands of the people who currently hold it. So the important thing is this. What do you think? What do you think about Biden stepping in, telling Major League Baseball to pull the game out of Georgia, which could ultimately cost $100 million in lost revenue for black-owned businesses in the Atlanta, Georgia area? What do you think about the fact that integrity laws do nothing more than protect the people who actually have the right to vote? I'm curious to know what you think. Comment below and let me know. And if you like what we do here at this channel, where we take pop culture and politics and present it to you in a conservative manner, in other words, filter it to you right, click that like and subscribe button and that bell icon so that you do not miss any future content. And if you want to help support this channel, click that join button to find out how to do just that. Also, please check out some content that we have right